Yeah, I mean, it looks like that's going to happen at this point, Nicole. The committee to investigate January 6th basically collapsing on itself. And it's because GOP leader Kevin McCarthy today said he was going to be pulling back all 5 of the Republicans that he chose to be on that committee, essentially telling Democrats, do it on your own. And then he said that Republicans are going to do their own investigation. Now, this happened because earlier this morning, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi told Republican leaders that 2 out of the 5 Republicans they chose, she was going to reject from being on this committee. Yeah, Rob, it already is that heated battle. And if a couple of days ago, the Republican conversation was, do we have enough votes? It seems like that has now shifted to, how do we get the process rolling? They seem very confident. Meantime, Democrats are also looking forward, trying to find ways to stop or slow that Republican process. Well, we're hearing a lot of them say they're excited to see what the president brings forward. Look, they're projecting from the White House a sense that the president has a deal that would unite all 50 Democratic senators, including those holdouts mentioned in Sinema that you talked about. But he's going to be addressing Democrats today on the other side of the Capitol. He's going to be speaking to House Democrats, where there is still a large group of these progressives who feel, frankly, like a lot of their biggest agenda items have been left out of the bill, or at least have been curbed back in the last couple of weeks. So the president's challenge is going to be to unite both sides of the party of those.
We heard President Barack Obama say that the thing he remembered most about his inaugurations was the immediate feeling going outside to the podium, seeing the near million people in the crowd. Well, Joe Biden is not going to get that opportunity. We have socially distanced seats here. It's only going to be about 1,000 people.
That's true, Nicole. And, you know, what a legacy. I mean, we're not just talking about how he broke barrier after barrier, but when you think about our foreign policy and our national security over the past 30 years, you'd be really hard-pressed to find one individual who had a bigger impact than Colin Powell. Add to that how rare it is. He's one of these rare figures, especially now, that has not only respect but admiration from both sides of the aisle. Now, this is probably the most decisive break that we've seen so far with Congresswoman Liz Cheney and her party. We know that Republican leaders warned all their members, do not accept any Democrats' invitation to be on this January 6th committee. Liz Cheney not only outright defied her party leaders, she not only accepted Speaker Pelosi's invitation to be on that committee and serve on it, but almost immediately she put out a statement. We can put some of it on the screen here, where she says she is proud to be on this committee, to be in. As House managers revealed new, never-before-seen security camera video of that January 6th attack on the Capitol. Their strategy here was to show that former President Trump incited the mob to an insurrection that came closer than anybody had known before to putting members of Congress and Vice President Mike Pence in danger of losing their lives. And they did it through a perspective that we have never seen before. So take a look here. First, they showed police radio communications as Capitol officers in those moments were outnumbered and were overwhelmed. They were pleading for help to try to keep the mob at bay. Yeah, Rob, so the FDA is looking into a possible link between the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and about 100 cases of Guillain-Barré disease. It's a disease that attacks the nervous system. But important to note, it's roughly 100 cases out of 12.8 million shots. So that is a very small, tiny fraction of a percent there. Nonetheless, Johnson & Johnson is going to have to go through an authorization now. What I was surprised about was that he did mention the COVID relief bill that he had just signed earlier today. And we expected him to do that. We expected him to talk about what in that bill is going to be good for the American people. And we certainly know there's going to be an effort from the White House, not only tonight, but in the weeks moving forward, to try to explain to the American people the benefits of it. He didn't touch on that until much later on in his speech. I thought that might have been something that was earlier, date that we had talked about earlier. I think the thing that stuck out to me most is at one point when he sort of leaned forward on the microphones and, you know, in a direct appeal to the American people and said, I need you. I need you. This is not hyperbole. I'm talking about the importance of taking the measures seriously and the importance of getting shots. He also at one point said, you know, the goal of the administration is to, by July 4th, return to some sense of normalcy. And he said,
whatever number it is, whatever check may come out, we are clueless as to a timeline because the president threw a huge wrench in all of this tonight.
That's exactly right. We
anticipated, according to Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, that the first round of those checks might go out next week, as early as Monday of next week. But that was contingent on Congress getting something done last night and the president signing this bill ASAP.
Yeah, Rob, it has become an all too familiar debate. And, you know, it was remarkable, really, in the worst kind of way. President Biden today said that when he ordered flags to be lowered to half staff to honor those who died in Colorado, they were actually already lowered. So he just had to order them to be maintained where they were for the victims in Atlanta just a week ago. And so, you know, after those two major mass shootings, and you mentioned others, President Biden today was moved, and he ordered Congress not just to talk about it, but to actually get something done.
And a lot of history has been made here on Capitol Hill. In just a week's time, we had that rush of the Capitol, an invasion, which quite literally we hadn't seen in this building in centuries. And that leads up to the historic vote today, a bipartisan vote, mind you, on the path now to remove President Trump from office while he has just days left in his. Today, the Senate was taking it up in this sort of, you know, marathon session where senators could make changes, amendments. There was going to be a lot of votes, and then eventually, well beyond midnight, we expected that process to wrap up. But what's happening right now and what you're seeing on the floor now, in a very rare move, one senator, Republican Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, actually forced through this rare move the clerks to be reading the entire bill, word for word, page by page, more than 600 pages out loud. So that is happening right now. That process is going to be hours just to get through it. Once
That's true, Nicole. And, you know, what a legacy. I mean, we're not just talking about how he broke barrier after barrier, but when you think about our foreign policy and our national security over the past 30 years, you'd be really hard pressed to find one individual who had a bigger impact than Colin Powell. Add to that how rare it is. He's one of these rare figures, especially now, that has not only respect but admiration from both sides of the aisle.
He broke so many barriers, and those barriers were not easy to break by any stretch.
Few people personify the American story like Colin Powell. Born to two Jamaican immigrants in Harlem, New York, Powell eventually rose to become a four-star general, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, National Security Advisor, and Secretary of State, serving under 4 presidents, the first black American in each of those roles.
The world lost one of the greatest leaders that we have ever witnessed. Alma lost a great husband, and the family lost a tremendous father.
In the run-up to Desert Storm, the general became known for the Powell Doctrine, which dictates the U.S. exhaust all options short of armed conflict and outline a clear exit strategy before resorting to war. But once at war, crush the enemy with overwhelming force.
Fight it, and fight it to the death. Fight it so they know that America cannot be challenged in this way.
Perhaps most remembered in his diplomatic role for a 2003 speech to the UN, making the case for war in Iraq, claiming Saddam Hussein was hiding weapons of mass destruction.
We have no indication that Saddam Hussein has ever abandoned his nuclear weapons program.
No such weapons were found. It was a speech Powell would publicly come to regret. As a political figure, Powell enjoyed rare approval and respect from both sides of the aisle.
Believe in America with all your heart and soul, with all of your mind. Remember that it remains the last best hope of Earth.
A Republican, Powell famously broke ranks and endorsed candidate Barack Obama in 2008, and in later years heaped scorn on former President Donald Trump. Recently, while out of public eye, Powell waged his final battle against COVID, at the same time suffering from a rare form of blood cancer that left him immunocompromised. He died Monday morning. Colin Luther Powell was 84 years old.
Above all, never lose faith in America. Its faults are yours to fix, not to curse.
Yeah, Rob, the U.S. government describes what's happening there as genocide and as modern-day slavery. So, yeah, the Department of Homeland Security and Customs and Border Protection, they are trying to stop the practice by stopping the products of forced labor from coming into the U.S. So we're highlighting that and one family's story, particularly who sadly has been directly impacted by this evil.
I don't know how many times I woke up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night and couldn't go back to sleep.
Thinking about what could be happening to your mom?
Yeah.
It's been more than 3 years since Ziba Murat has seen her mother Gulshan, whom she says was taken to a forced labor camp in northwest China. Ziba's mother is one of an estimated 1 million Uyghurs, an ethnic minority, to be taken against her will into what the Chinese Communist government calls re-education camps. The U.S. State Department calls it something else: genocide.
Until our family is returned back to us, it's not going to be normal. We're going to be living in this for God knows how long.
Ziba fears the worst. A recent human rights report details examples of torture, rape, forced sterilization, even death in the camps.
Forced labor is modern-day slavery. It's nothing less than that. 25 million people throughout the world are suffering because of forced labor.
The U.S. government has decided to fight back. Ed Fox is director of the seaport of Newark and New York. Recently, Customs and Border Protection ramped up its efforts to flag all imports it believes comes from the camps. Anything illegal, anything that's flagged comes here.
Right. Anything that CBP wants to examine.
That means clothing, like shirts and shoes, even hair products, produce, and palm oil. Those goods are either destroyed or sent back.
Not only do American companies get the point because it's a matter of economics for them. When you seize their shipment, they lose the value.
Nationwide, about $50 million worth of imports have been flagged this year alone.
So far this year, we've had 128 detentions with a value over $12 million.
Do you think that's an effective way to try to change that practice of forced labor in other places?
Sure. I think that the best we can do is to ensure that anything that is the product of forced labor doesn't enter into the U.S. commerce. The goal here is to get people out of modern-day slavery.
Ziba says despite the challenges ahead, she believes that day will come.
I have hope. I have hope in humanity, and I have hope in my government.
And on a personal note, I really want to thank Ziba for sharing her family's story. Certainly, it takes bravery to do that. It's not easy. She has a 3-year-old daughter at home, hoping that one day her mother will be able to meet her daughter. We should also mention, Customs and Border Protection, they are trying to ramp up their efforts, but things do fall through the cracks. So it is possible that American consumers are walking around wearing shoes or shirts or using other products that are the products of forced labor. So it's just another testament to how important the work is to try to stop this from happening. Rob? Hey, good evening. Yeah, we talked about a lot, and it's certainly been an interesting journey for Pete Buttigieg from South Bend, Indiana, to here in Washington, D.C. But he's got a lot on his plate right now, big challenges, mainly how the pandemic has impacted almost every single way we travel, from the buses and trains that go through Union Station behind me here to struggling airlines. So we talked about that, and also how he envisions the future of infrastructure in this country. The millennial mayor turned presidential hopeful, Pete Buttigieg, traded in his title, Mayor Pete,
Peter Buttigieg,
for Secretary of Transportation. Now, he says, he has his work cut out for him.
There's so much that we have to do right now. First of all, of course, dealing with the impacts of the pandemic, making sure that travelers and workers in the transportation sector are safe. But that's just the beginning.
Secretary Buttigieg, one of the youngest people to ever hold that title, is calling for a generational investment in infrastructure. Every year there are, billion-dollar highway projects as well. Are we rethinking the way that people go to work? After the pandemic, it seems as though people may be staying at home, working remotely more often. Is that investment moving forward going to be a wise use of funds?
It's definitely time to prepare for the future instead of just recycling the ideas of the past. Look, we're always going to need good roads and highways, but the way they're laid out might change quite a bit.
But before addressing future plans, Secretary Buttigieg is responsible for airline, rail, and public transit industries, all currently in crises.
In the context of the pandemic, there have been fewer riders paying those fares, and that's been a huge strain on the system. It's one of the reasons why the president's leadership on the American Recovery or Rescue Package is so urgent.
Buttigieg says passing the COVID relief package will be crucial to helping those industries survive. A large part of President Biden's economic plans hinge on clean energy and zero-emission vehicles. For towns and states whose economies run on the coal, oil, and gas industries, that could mean serious job loss. What role is your office going to have to play in, having that transition and making sure people aren't losing their livelihoods?
Well, this hits home for me literally because I grew up in a city that was home to an automaker, and that automaker was gone by the time I was born, and we were still feeling it. But I believe that there is way more upside than downside in these new technologies, provided that we meet those technologies in a way that supports and is often led by American workers. Look, I believe that American workers are the best positioned in the world to innovate, to create and deliver these new kinds of vehicles.
With the vast challenges of re-innovating an entire sector of the economy, we asked Secretary Buttigieg what about being mayor of a town of 100,000 people makes him qualified for this job.
I'll tell you, when you're a mayor, you are living and breathing infrastructure, and that was certainly true in our city. We're a city in the heart of the industrial Midwest, had a lot of issues with how people get around.
Still, there are some lawmakers on Capitol Hill who have reservations. 13 Republican senators voted against Buttigieg's nomination to the cabinet.
He lacks some experience in that area.
Republican Senator Joni Ernst says she doesn't feel Buttigieg has any expertise when it comes to transportation specifically, although she did vote to confirm him.
I don't feel he has the direct level of experience. I do believe that he has enough experience to be a solid leader.
And as a leader of an important sector of American life, Buttigieg says in the short term, his efforts will be dictated by science.
Mandating masks on transportation that is federally regulated, and really urging folks to wear masks on public transit and any of those other spaces where you're coming close to other people. Look, the way to get our economy back is to beat the pandemic.
And, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe a couple of months down the road, maybe a year or so, once we're done with the pandemic, if Secretary Buttigieg isn't a core part of a large infrastructure package. For all the division here in Washington, one thing that seems to have bipartisan support is the idea that we need to fix our crumbling roads and bridges in states all over the country. So we can certainly see some unity there, and that's something that he's expressed interest in, something he says is on his list of priorities. Reporting live tonight in Washington, D.C., Joe Khalil, NewsNation.